men who qualify. They will receive exceptional wages. Only experienced truck drivers willing to risk their life can do it. No one else should apply.
The 1970s was a great time to be an auteur filmmaker in the new Hollywood era. Some of the greatest American filmmakers blossomed in the 1970s after the collapse of the studio system and Hays Code gave directors new freedom they had never experienced. A new generation took hold of that freedom to make art which has never been possible under a fairly restrictive regime. Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg all made incredible work during this time period. One of the most versatile and hardworking of these new Hollywood directors was Billy Friedkin. After flailing around at first trying to find a niche in documentary filmmaking and art films, Friedkin burst into the scene in 1971 with The French Connection.
Have you ever been to Poughkeepsie? Huh? Have you ever been to Poughkeepsie?
Hey, man, come on, give me a break. I don't know what you're talking about.
Let me hear you say it. Come on. Have you ever been to Poughkeepsie? You've been to Poughkeepsie, haven't you?
The French Connection took home 5 Oscars, including Best Actor for Gene Hackman and Best Director for Friedkin. His next entry couldn't have been more different. Showcasing how varied his talents could be, Friedkin took on The Exorcist. It couldn't have been a more controversial choice, earning both rave reviews, disgust and condemnation, especially by Catholics, although the Vatican no longer had the clout to stop it from being made, and became the highest grossing movie of 1973. A rarity for horror movies, Friedkin got 10 Oscar nominations, including for Best Picture, but only ended up taking home Best Adapted Screenplay. Tonight we are talking about a far more often ignored, and at least at the time, critically panned entry in Friedkin's output. We're going to be talking about 1977's Sorcerer. One of the many controversies surrounding this movie is that it's widely understood to be a remake of The Wages of Fear. The Wages of Fear was a 1953 French thriller by Henri Georges Clouzot. One of the most shocking French films of the 1950s, it was the story of 4 Europeans that get hired by an American oil company in Latin America. After an oil well gets set on fire, they must travel 300 miles or 500 kilometers to the oil fields with an incredibly volatile nitroglycerin in trucks to cap it and put it out. The controversy is that, despite dedicating it to Clouzot and The Wages of Fear being one of his favorite movies, Friedkin claims it is not a remake. Billy Friedkin calls it a reimagining and thinks the films are significantly different. Friedkin imagined a similar plot outline, but with all new characters and a far grittier documentary style. As Sorcerer has gotten reevaluated and looked at with some distance, some critics have wondered if the original distaste for Sorcerer comes from the belief that Friedkin should not have reimagined a French classic. Ironically, some might say once again touching a sacrilegious project. Around the same time that the crew left for the Dominican Republic, Francis Ford Coppola was leaving for the Philippines to shoot Apocalypse Now. It's been speculated that part of Friedkin's decision to turn Sorcerer from the side project into a big-budget movie he'd throw himself into was that he wanted the jungle epic like Apocalypse Now was rumored to be. Coppola's 4-month proposed shoot in the Philippines would turn into a 2-year epic that almost killed him as he turned into a Colonel Kurtz-like beast. Billy Friedkin's journey into the Dominican Republic is similarly legendary. Friedkin ended up replacing the entire film crew after getting into a dispute with cinematographer Dick Bush, and also the on-set Teamsters representative, which meant replacing the trucking crew. Many crew members got food poisoning, gangrene, injuries, and malaria. At least 50 people had to be replaced. Billy Friedkin was diagnosed with malaria after the shoot and had lost 50 pounds. In Mexico, an undercover agent found many of the crew members had drugs, and they needed to be replaced. The movie has sequences shot in Jerusalem, New Mexico, Paris, and Veracruz as vignettes that were all shot on location. The bulk of the film, though, was shot in the Dominican Republic after Charles Bloodhorn, who was an oil billionaire that owned Gulf and Western and had purchased Paramount, invited Friedkin to shoot on location. Gulf and Western had become one of the largest employers in the country after purchasing the La Romana Free Zone, which in 1976 was the subject of intense scrutiny. This, somewhat hilariously, led to even more controversy.
Aren't in this country terrorists who blow up American oil wells are heroes?
We're paying that government to give us protection.
Our president cannot risk his liberal image by sending his troops to chase patriots.
Friedkin's reimagining of The Wages of Fear looks at the American business role in Latin America and the exploitation of workers. 4 men, fleeing different crimes, end up in a remote village in Colombia. The main character is an Irish gangster from New Jersey named Jackie Scallan. Friedkin imagined this role played by Steve McQueen, but after McQueen backed out and several other actors passed on it, Friedkin hired Roy Snyder. Roy Snyder had worked on The French Connection as Popeye Doyle's partner, but had since found huge acclaim with Jaws.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
We also get Victor Manzin, a French banker who is accused of falsely representing 15 million francs in collateral, a Palestinian political terrorist named Qassem, and a Mexican assassin named Nilo. They all end up in a small Colombian village working for an American oil company for barely any money. There is no difference between their exploitation and the exploitation of the massive Colombians also employed. An oil well explodes, and though anti-gringo terrorism is suspected, cannot be proven, and it's reported as an accident. This is where one of the biggest controversies came into play. The company is very clearly Gulf and Western. Friedkin infuriated Bloodorn by even having him on the wall in the background in a corporate photo. 35 years later, in 2013, Friedkin would sue Paramount for not allowing him to screen the film. Like in The Wages of Fear, the only way to put out the fire caused by the explosion is nitroglycerin. However, this nitroglycerin has been improperly stored and so is so unstable that any bit of vibration could detonate all of it.
It sits for a long time without being turned. That liquid nitro seeps out of the sticks and into the bag. If you give those cases any kind of a bump, it will blow.
Our four protagonists are hired and offered higher wages at a time when everyone is living in poverty in the village to drive the nitroglycerin in trucks over rough and treacherous terrain 200 kilometers to the oil field. Friedkin and screenwriter Wallen Green wanted to examine American business and its relationship with exploitation in Latin America. I think we get a devastating but ultimately uneven look into the life faced by workers in the in Colombia.
That means you don't think all the trucks will make it. One of us is a bagger.
We want double and legal residence, or we don't try.
You leave in 4 hours.
In retrospect, it's been speculated about why this film failed critically and commercially at the time. It is now largely viewed positively by critics. One reason, personally posited by Friedkin, is that Sorcerer was an ill-advised Exorcist reference that seemed cool at the time, but later he realized it may have disappointed audiences when they learned that they weren't watching an Exorcist sequel or spin-off. A second, and much larger reason quite literally, is that Paramount opened it against Star Wars: A New Hope.
Star Wars has been a good luck charm for theaters throughout the country. The movie made $2.6 million nationally during the first 3 days it played.
And the prestige of being able to say you've seen Star Wars is something akin to royalty, really.
Star Wars cost $9 million to produce. It will bring in at least 10 times that amount. As a result, the price of 20th Century Fox stock has doubled in the last 2 weeks.
Billy Friedkin's Sorcerer was literally caught in a tractor beam and swallowed whole by George Lucas's Death Star. Many critics see the failure of Sorcerer as the official moment the blockbuster film finally eclipsed the auteur cinema experiment. Billy Friedkin still sees Sorcerer as his best work and the film that came closest to his original vision.
You ever think of going to Managua?
Managua? Shit, there's no way I can go to Managua.